Welcome to London Lights, the program where we focus on notable Londoners who have made a large impact on the world of music, sports, entertainment, politics. And tonight I'm honored to have as my guest Yuri Pool of the McCartney Years. Yuri, good to see you. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you for having me, Dan.
Yeah. Now I'm wondering, before we get started, should I be referring to you as Sir Yuri?
Well, I haven't been knighted, so.
Well, I want to talk about the McCartney Years, obviously, the show that you've put together. You've had tremendous success with that. It's essentially a worldwide phenomenon. And I have a poster in my basement. Sid Bernstein welcomes the Beatles to Shea Stadium, 1965. Now, Sid Bernstein has commented about your McCartney Years tribute to Paul McCartney and Wings, and he says it's the number one tribute. Is that true?
Yeah, so in just 2007, when we just started out, I was in New York, and I was actually playing with Billy Joel's old band, his old backing band that sort of torpedoed Billy Joel to the hit records or the top of the charts in the 1970s, and his backing band has always been performing ever since. So as I was asked to perform with them in New York, and Sid Bernstein attended the show, and they performed an evening full of songs dedicated to the Beatles and Paul McCartney and Wings. The shows that they did would have a theme, and they called me up to do it. I was actually in England at the time when I got the call. So yeah, we did the show, and he knew about the McCartney Years. And he said it was one of the greatest odes to Paul McCartney and Wings that he had ever seen. So that was an accolade that I've always carried with me. Sid Bernstein obviously passed away, and yeah, he passed away a number of years ago. But yeah, such a great man, and to sit down with him after the show for like 5-10 minutes and talk about Beatles firsthand was just one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. Yeah,
I bet it's a tremendous accolade from someone who obviously knows the music business and is familiar with the Beatles. So, what's your background, Yuri? Did you grow up in London, Ontario? Was it England? And how did you become so attracted to the music of the Beatles and Paul McCartney?
well, I sort of have an interesting history in terms of travel. My father was a big accountant and financial controller for a large dredging and construction firm back in the Netherlands. So, as of a young age, I was already used to flying a lot, like in bigger and smaller planes across the world. So, by the time I reached like 5 or 6 years old, I had traveled a lot already. My dad, in his time, was an avid Beatles fan, unbeknownst to me, by the way, because he never talked about it until I reached the age of about 6 years old, when I started pulling the LPs out of his closet. And the one thing they say, you can never touch your dad's LPs, right? So I did it, and I was reading some of the LPs that he had, and I remember being caught by the LPs of the Beatles. And namely, I mean, Sgt. Pepper's was such an interesting thing, because as a kid there was just so much going on that album, right? And even at that age, because I was raised bilingually, I was able to read English, so I could understand the lyrics on the flip side of the inside actually of Sgt. Pepper's. So I was very intrigued, and I asked my dad pretty much every day ever since if I could listen, if I could hear them, and I did so until the age of 6 or 7, when I got a little boom box for my birthday, and he had put all the LPs in little cassettes. And I played all those cassettes until they disintegrated. Literally every day, day and night, I would play the cassettes. And the crazy thing is, a lot of the knowledge that I have picked up from that age, I still use today. Like, I know pretty much every part of every Beatles song, whether it's drums, bass, piano. I hear everything in all the songs. And it's because of that, because I would sit, like close to the speaker and listening to the songs over and over again. So, so that's really like how my love for the Beatles started, which is really through my dad's records.
Well, you mentioned Sergeant Pepper. I have my Sergeant Pepper shirt on here today. I couldn't find a McCartney shirt, sorry. But Rolling Stone, I just learned this week, voted Sergeant Pepper #1 album of all time. And that album was recorded, 53 years ago, something like that. And it's a tremendous testament to the Beatles and to that album that here we are all these years later, and Sgt. Pepper's considered the #1 pop album of all time. And I think that says a lot. I've also read a number of books recently about various rock performers, and they all go back to that Ed Sullivan show when the Beatles played that night on the Ed Sullivan show, February 1964, I believe it was. And it was like an earthquake that just had such a huge impact on all young people that were watching the show, and they all wanted to get out and get a guitar and start playing. Did you have an experience like that turned you onto the Beatles as well as the albums that you talked about?
Yeah, I mean, back in my home country of the Netherlands, the Beatles were on the radio very often. So even sort of before I got into the albums, I had already heard most of the songs because they were just playing on the radio continuously. So I do remember one occasion where, I mean, we would drive to see my grandparents, once every week or once every 2 weeks. We'd go and visit them, and the radio would be on in the car. And I do remember, like Can Buy Me Love and A Hard Day's Night come on the radio back to back. And they're just such great songs, happy songs, And I remember asking my dad about who this band was, and he said, that's the Beatles. And obviously knowing that he had a lot of records, I asked him if he had any records of the Beatles, and he did. So that's, for me, that really was the start of my love for the Beatles. I got touched by their songs and their music like every generation before, when the songs came out in 62, 3, 4, So yeah, I mean, the band is highly influential. Artists nowadays, Post Malone was talking about the Beatles just the other day. So even artists nowadays talk about the Beatles as one of their main influences. So it touched them as it has touched me. And a really good friend of mine once said, when I was still living in England, playing in a major Beatles act there, which really saw my first sort of big touring experiences across the world. He said, once you get into this, you can never get out. It's always going to call you back. So, but it's great. I mean, I'm surrounded here by all this equipment and guitars and everything that I've accumulated over the last 15 or 14 years when I started the McCartney Years, trying to be as authentic as possible. And it's just great, it's just great to walk into the studio and see all that history.
Well, and you mentioned the happiness that is in that music. There's a joyfulness in Beatle music. I mean, they were a band that was popular, as you know, in the 1960s, a lot of troubled times and social changes at that time, but still they managed to keep that quality. And as it matured, it got even stronger, but there was always a positiveness that I found to the band. You probably heard about are you a Stones fan or a Beatles fan? And there was definitely that kind of dichotomy between the two bands, but a joyfulness is what's always attracted me to the Beatles music.
Well, I mean, the Beatles never wrote songs about, you know, leave your mother, go and do drugs. They just wrote great songs about what was happening at the time. And obviously, the 60s were a very influential time period. So they were just writing what they were seeing around them. They were not only a product of their time, but the time was a product of them. They were linked to each other. And generations after that are still feeling those effects, like myself, and even my son and my daughter. You know, a traveling band taking the family on the road, they see that every day. They hear the music every day. So
Yeah.
so
And
yeah,
my son has a Beatles calendar on his
yeah.
wall as well.
It's
So let's focus a little bit on the McCartney years. I mean, the Beatles were fantastic. Paul was considered one of the great Beatles, maybe the greatest. There's always that argument: who's better, who's the biggest, John Lennon or Paul McCartney. It probably doesn't matter. Together, they were this tremendous, successful songwriting duo that wrote so many fantastic songs, time after time after time, which made them so unique. But what attracted you to Paul McCartney? And of course, he had that 4-octave singing range. Maybe you have that as well. I'm not sure. But what was it about Paul that attracted you to him?
Um, I used to. It's funny that you talk about the vocal range, because I used to play this piano in this art gallery back in Holland, and I would just run through a number of songs just for kicks. And the owner at the time said, "You have McCartney's vocal range. You should do something with it." So this was sort of in my early 20s, and I had already made music locally with a number of people that I was working with at the time. But it wasn't really until I did an audition in England, probably just less than a year later. They were auditioning for a part as Paul McCartney in an international Beatles touring production. So I flew from Holland to England to audition, and I remember sitting in the room. There were just tons of people there, all having the same interests and everything. And I thought, if nothing comes of it, then at least I make a couple of friends. So I did the audition and I came in. And then as I was going back home, I was sitting in a train. They called me up and said, "Yes, you have the part, and we were hoping that you can perform with us in 3 weeks from now."
Well, that's great.
So yeah. I mean, that was sort of my audition, but it was the McCartney years really was something for me, because I mean, I've always been a great fan of McCartney's music and post Beatles, Wings, but no one was doing it. And so I was wondering why that was, why nobody was doing it. I mean, it could have been because I know it doesn't sell, or if truly nobody ever thought about doing Wings, as Wings was intended originally in the 1970s. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to be that guy. So that's why I started the McCartney years. I moved to Canada and literally started right off the plane.
Yuri, we have to take a short commercial break. To the viewers, don't go away. We'll be right back with Yuri Pool after this break. Okay, welcome back. We're here with Yuri Pool of the McCartney Years. We're talking about Yuri's involvement with one of the greatest, or the greatest, Paul McCartney and Wings tribute band with worldwide success. So Yuri, welcome back. You sent me a photo. I was going to use it as my background, but changed my mind about that. But it showed a picture of you and your wife your wife Jennifer, singing into a microphone, and I could have sworn it was Linda McCartney there with you. You guys were a spitting image of Paul and Linda. And tell me about that. Does she sometimes perform with you and fill in for Linda's parts?
No, actually, she's in the band full time.
Oh,
Yeah, so we had Laura Gagnon, also a London artist, fill the position of Linda for a number of years in the band. And then she decided to go off and pursue a solo career, and she moved to Ottawa for that, and I believe she's doing great. And I remember the evening when she called up and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing something else." And I talked to my wife Jennifer about that, and she said, "Well, why don't I do Linda then?" And I was like, "But of course." Exactly, because this is what happened. This is what happened in the early 70s with Paul as well. He asked his wife if he wanted to join the band, and then she did. This time, Jennifer came up with it, and she's like, I think I can do it. And she's played piano in the past and drums, so she has musical experience. So yeah, we worked day and night on rehearsing the show together, and she joined, and she's been with us now for the last three and a half years. So it's great, and it's just great to have her on stage and to have her with us all the time, because we love traveling as a unit, as a family, much in the same way that Paul and Linda were doing in the 70s. They got on the bus together, and so do we, and travel across the continent and perform show after show. So yeah.
The story of Paul and Linda is a tremendous rock love story.
Yeah.
So tell me more about the McCartney years. So here you are now. People are identifying you as having the McCartney vocal range and kind of that McCartney look. So how does this now transform from London, Ontario, into this successful band, this tribute act that becomes successful around the world? How did that all come about?
Well, so I decided to rebrand in 2012 and really focus on getting that Wings image. I really wanted to sort of move away from, with all respect to the Beatles, but I wanted to move away from being sort of Beatles-oriented band, because there are so many bands out there that are already doing it. So I felt like, I want to do something different, want to do something new that is not on the market, but that I believe has great potential. So I really focused on McCartney and more particularly Paul McCartney and Wings. So what I did was I took the 1975-1976 world tours that McCartney did with Wings, which I believe, and many fans believe, is Paul McCartney at the height of his career, and built a show around that. So I did that, and then I recorded a concert that we actually did at the Aeolian Hall in London entirely, and I sent it across the United States to a bunch of major agencies, and within 20 minutes, I got a phone call from a major agency in New York City, and the guy was on his way from Miami to New York, and he said, "Don't talk to anybody else. I'm gonna be in New York in a couple of hours, and I'm gonna conference call you, but don't take any calls from anybody else." That was the very first conversation I had with this particular agency. And we've been with them now ever since 2011, I believe now, 2011 or 2012. And they really got us onto the bigger stages. And yeah, nowadays, well, right now, nobody's working, but yeah, we play theaters and small arenas. Some of the biggest shows we've played had 20,000 plus people coming to see us, which is just fantastic, going from like little community theaters to that. Yeah, for us that was like a real big deal. A couple of guys from London.
That's great. So you've got the McCartney years happening. Before the virus hit this year, how many shows would you have typically done in a year?
On good years, we would probably do almost like 100 concerts across the world. So from Canada, United States, South America, Europe, mainly the United States, because it's just the biggest market there. I'd say 75% of our shows are there. But yeah, prior to when the virus hit, we did almost 100 shows. Quieter years, we would do like 65, 60, 60, 70 shows a year. In fact, we were on tour when the virus hit. And we were just on our way from Indianapolis to Chicago when the governor there shut down the state, and there were rumors that the borders were going to shut. So we took a right turn and headed back to Canada, and that was the end of it. That was March 13, I believe. So yeah, we've been home ever since. But just spending time with the family is sort of a blessing in disguise, and like. We were an extremely busy band, so being able to sort of like take this time and reflect and look ahead. Obviously, we're looking ahead at a great 2021, so working already with that. But in the meantime, I think everybody's sort of doing their own thing.
Well, I think Londoners are very proud of you and what you've accomplished. It makes us proud. You've almost acquired legendary status in London. I remember a little incident. I saw you. You were going to play a show at the London Public Library, I believe, and I saw you carrying your own equipment in. And I went, "Wait a minute, what's Yuri Pool doing carrying his equipment? Doesn't he have 3 or 4 roadies and somebody fanning him as he gets ready for a show?" But that's the life of a musician, right? But I got to tell you, one of my great memories of you was when you performed the rooftop concert in 2009. And tell us about that. What motivated that, and what was that like? I remember it was a cold day, and I'm wondering, how is he playing guitar on such a cold day? But I guess the Beatles had to do the same thing when they performed some Let It Be songs on the rooftop. But tell us your experience there.
I mean, every year as a Beatles fan, a McCartney fan, when January 30th comes around, you have to stop, and think about, in 1969, that was the last time that the Beatles performed live as a group, So, 2009 came around, and I worked with a couple of guys before that. And I called them up and this was like 3 weeks before, and I say, hey, 2009 marks the 40th anniversary of the Beatles rooftop concert. What do you say? We go on the roof, rain or shine, and we perform the exact set that they did 40 years before. And I thought, they're just going to tell me I'm crazy or something. But they were really open to it. It's like, yeah, let's do it. This is great, So I called James Reaney up, the London Free Press, and I told him, and he'd been following us for a couple of years of what we were doing. So we had become friends. I called him up and said, look, listen, and I knew he was a big Beatles fan. I said, I'm planning this rooftop concert. And he's like, oh my God, that's great. If nothing happens on that day, we'll give you front page news. But please go ahead. This is going to be so great for London. And then I called up Lee Robert of the Hawk, the radio station at the time. And she's a big Beatles fan. She's like, oh my God, that is so great. And we'll write you a blank check, do whatever you want. If they arrest you, we're there with the cameras and the microphones, And I thought, that would be a great end to the show. Obviously, it would have been great had they dragged us from that roof. But yeah, so I mean, we didn't really say anything to anybody, and so we just went ahead and do it. Like, go on the roof, set up quietly, and start. And obviously that morning it was in the newspaper because James Reaney had published it. And it was a big success, and they had to shut down the street and reroute the buses, and I just remember these horizontal snow tornadoes coming over the roof. But the funny thing is, I don't remember the cold at all, So,
I do.
Yeah, so the first couple of songs you feel a little stiff, but then after that it was just free, go ahead and do it.
Cool.
So
Yuri, we've got to wrap up here in a couple minutes. Have you ever met Paul McCartney himself? Has he contacted you in any way?
No, I mean it's a romantic thought to think that, hey, I'm doing this and he's aware of it. I know that MPL, which is his firm, his publishing firm in New York, is aware of us because I've been working together with them on the McCartney Years to make sure that everything's okay. I want to do everything by the book. So they actually have approved and protected all our promotional materials.
Cool.
So if like the YouTube bots or whatnot, or people get takedown, or I don't know, people hate it or so and want it taken down, then we're actually protected from that. So which is great, which in the way, you know, is a romantic thought to think that Paul McCartney himself is like clicking there and like, okay.
I
But
bet he has. I bet he's clicked on you and he's watched some of your performances.
on the
I wouldn't
plane,
be surprised to hear from him someday. Hey,
look at,
Yuri, we got to wrap up. It's been great to have you on the show here, London Lights. I hope we've passed the audition, as they say.
oh
And thanks, and keep up the great work. As I say, you make Londoners proud. Thank you, viewers, for being with this edition of London Lights, and stay tuned for the next show coming up real soon.